So it's a pleasure to be with you guys again today. Thanks, Pastor Sam, for allowing me to take the podium once more. I was telling somebody a couple of weeks ago, I'm pretty sure out of everybody that I know, all the pastors that I know, that I could call up Sam on like a Saturday night and be like, dude, can I preach tomorrow? And he'd be like, yeah, sure, come on in. So one day I might actually do that, just to test that theory. But can you guys hear me okay? Microphone? All right. So I want to take an opportunity today. We're sharing with our supporting churches, realizing that with us living in Guatemala for 8 years, whenever we came back, it was kind of like trying to, update everybody on 2+ years of work that we've been doing in a, 20-minute presentation. So now that we're here, fixed in the United States, kind of give us the opportunity to do regular updates and actually talk more about the ministry itself in Guatemala. And so now that we have shared about us launching out from servants, starting our own nonprofit to specifically support that work in Guatemala, and the team and the ministry that we built there, I wanted to go a little bit more in depth today. And I was thinking right before I came up, I love that this is Journey of Faith Church. And please silence all cell phones. No, I'm just again trying to be awkward. No, I love the name Journey of Faith Church because as I was talking about what I'm getting ready to share today, it is definitely a story about someone's journey of faith and how what God's called us to do in Guatemala is to join with people and come alongside them and help them walk through at least part of that journey of their own faith. So in order to share this with you, I want to invite you into a story. I want to invite you into a story that is unfortunately all too similar, at least in different elements, of many whom that we serve in Guatemala and who are waiting to be served or need help. So I want you to imagine with me, there's a girl in Honduras. She's part of a family that goes to church regularly, but the family itself isn't very loving. She's always working very hard to gain the approval of her parents, her siblings, those that she knows, but she never really gets it. And she's not able to go to school because, well, her family really can't afford it, but specifically because she's the black sheep of the family, they don't make it a priority to do something to make sure that she can go to school. So somewhere in the middle of second grade, she just drops out and gives up. She's like, what's the point? This is too hard. I can't do this. I don't want to do this anymore. She was never really encouraged to continue or do well in school. And so she just stops going to school and essentially becomes the servant of the family because they're like, great, now that you're not spending time in school, you can help us around the house. So she starts, taking care of the house, doing laundry, cooking, cleaning, taking care of her parents, whatever it is they want her to do, continues to be disrespected by her siblings. Now, I think maybe to put in an easier context for us to understand, you guys all know the story of Cinderella, right? Kind of like that, except she wasn't a stepdaughter, she was an actual daughter. And there really was, when we read Cinderella now, we know at the end there's this fairy godmother, there's this prince, there's this big ball. None of that was in her future. So she grows up learning about God, but without any real understanding of who He is as a loving father, a caring parent, a protective daddy. She fears God, but she's never really experienced Him. All she knows is that her family hates her, and she can't wait for the day to be able to escape this life. Finally, at the age of 17, she finds an escape. She had recently developed a new friendship with a girl in her community, and they gotten to know each other and became like best friends. And one day, this new friend of hers says, "Hey, I got this idea. Let's flee our homes. Let's flee the country. Let's immigrate to the United States. We can get work there. We can be our own boss. We can do whatever we want, and it'll be great." I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I'm game. So they put together this plan. In the middle of the night, she sneaks at her home, meets up with her friends, and they start the trek north. Next slide. So, leaving Honduras, next slide, please. Leaving Honduras, as you can see here, Guatemala is between Honduras and Mexico, which, as we know, Mexico is just south of the United States. So that's their first step, is they have to get to the border with Guatemala, sneak across the border because they're going illegally. They're underage teenagers, so she's got no documentation. She's got no actual legal status. She's just going on a whim with her friend, and they're going together, so they'll be good. So once they cross the border into Guatemala, this neglected, abused, uneducated, helpless girl discovers that her new friend really isn't a friend at all, but in fact works for a human trafficking ring and gets paid to lure women like this girl across the border where they can't defend themselves or do anything about it because of their legal status, and is taken to this holding facility where she is held captive with others who are, in her own words, forced to do unimaginable things to work off a debt that she doesn't actually have. They didn't tell her how long that she would be there, but she has to do what they say, and that's the threat that they tell her, or else they'll kill her. Right? That's the threat that they always give. Well, it's at this point that she, in desperation, cries out to God and says, God, if you really exist, I need you to give me a way out. And he did. So, as part of her duties in this holding facility, she was required to, cook and make food and serve the guards and all that kind of stuff. And so, through a series of circumstances, she was able to get her hands on some sleeping pills and was able to grind them up and cook them in with her lemonade and serve them all. Sleeping pills through their lemonade one night. And so nighttime came and they all fell asleep. So she's like, this is my chance. Thank you, God. So 2 o'clock in the morning, she is sneaking out of the compound with just the clothes on her back, which isn't a whole lot, by the way. And now she has this huge chain link fence that she has to scale. She climbs up to the top and it's got barbed wire and stuff all over the place. And she actually gets stuck in the barbed wire. So, I want you guys to imagine this. She's a slave at home. She's looking for a way out. She finally finds a way out, only to be made a slave in a different way. And now, she's asking God to help her. He saves her. She starts to flee, and then she gets stuck. 2 o'clock in the morning, half-dressed, hanging on top of a chain link fence, caught up in barbed wire, wondering what in the world is going to happen to me now. The only thing that she could think of doing is just asking God for help. I mean, I don't know about you guys. That's all I would know to do, right? Cry and pray, right? Well, it just so happened that a fire truck was driving by this compound at 2 o'clock in the morning, responding to a burning house fire. And he's driving and, sees this girl hanging from a fence. And he's like, what the heck? So he pulls over and gets the ladder out and helps her down. And she explains her story to him. And he says, well, come with me. And so she goes in the truck with him. And I have no idea what happens to the burning house at this point. But all I know is that the firefighters take her in, give her a place to stay, find her some clothes, get her some food, give her shelter. She's like, well, I can't live in a firehouse my whole life. She's in Guatemala. She probably has no idea even which direction at this point where Honduras is, but she ain't going back to where she came from. But she has no idea where to go. So she starts to go door to door in her community and knocking on doors and saying, hey, I can cook dinner for you for money, or I can clean your house, or I can do your laundry, or I can make tortillas. All these things that she was forced to do for years in her family, she became really good at. And so she started making money. I would say making a living, but it was just really survival at this point. Was able to, pay rent for a small room in somebody else's house to live. And she kind of started, making a life for herself, which from our perspective isn't really a life at all. It's just survival. In the process of all this, she met a man who she fell in love with and fell in love with her. And over time, she trusted him enough to tell him her story, and they got married. He said, I'll take care of you, and I'll love you. Um, so it was great, and he is now the father of her 3 children. Next slide, please. And there she is with her 3 kids. Years ago, but this loving man that she married and had 3 children with wound up being an abusive alcoholic. So once again, she's a slave in her own home. So not only now does she have to raise 3 children, but she also has to work on the side, in addition to maintaining her own home, just to make enough money to pay for food and clothing and schooling and housing and all this. I mean, the husband works, but he drinks all his money away. And sometimes would even come and steal money from her that she made to maintain the house, just so that he could continue drinking because he drank everything away. That's 3 times a slave. So finally she got to a point, she's like, I need to leave. Not only for myself, but my kids. They can't grow up in this environment. It's not healthy for them. We can't even make ends meet because of the situation. At the very least, if I'm not in this situation, I could make enough money to support my kids. Now, she had these 3 kids in Guatemala, and as I mentioned before, she has no legal status whatsoever. She's an illegal immigrant in Guatemala. So, in the process of this whole time, which was about a decade or so, her sister had actually moved legally from Honduras to Guatemala to live, to find better work there and stuff. And so the way that her kids were registered are actually like legally on paper, it is her sister and her husband who are the father and mother of the kids, so they could have a birth certificate, so they could go to school, so they could get health care and all that kind of stuff. So she doesn't even have like legal guardianship of her kids. But she doesn't care. She's got to get out. So while her husband's at work, she gets her 3 kids and they flee. Now she didn't really have anywhere to go, so she went to her sister's house. It sounds like a good idea until later that evening the husband comes home. She fled. Where's the first place he's going to look? It's her sister's house. There they are. So he takes the 2 boys back home with him. Says, fine, you want to be with me? There you are. So either with her daughter, I'll take the boys. Well, not too long after this, it just so happened that a local church was actually serving ministry in the public school system. And so the schools will let them come in once a week for about an hour or 2 and teach a Bible lesson to the kids. Play some games, have some fun, tell them about Jesus. And this way they were able to get to know the kids in the community and, try to find out how they can serve the families and stuff like that. And so this woman's daughter, one time when they came, was just sitting in the corner crying by herself, not participating. So, of course, they approached her and asked her what was going on. And she said that she's afraid that her mom's going to kill herself. And they said, well, why would you say that? And so she told, from her perspective, obviously, but the story of what had been going on recently. And so they said, well, where do you guys live? And, so the church kind of went and visited them and talked to the woman and asked her for, what was going on. And the church decided that they're going to take her in. Now, not only did they take her and her daughter in, then they also helped find her legal counsel so she could fight for custody of her 2 boys, even though legally they weren't even hers. That sounds pretty cool, huh? Church I want to be a part of. There's still a lot of trauma to overcome. She's a single mom with 3 kids, no education. Remember, she dropped out in 2nd grade. There's no legal documentation. And while this church brought her in, it's almost like being in the firehouse all over again. She has absolutely no idea where to go or what to do. And the church brought her in, but it's not like they had a whole lot of resources to actually help her. Like they can get her, connected with some services in the community, but there really isn't a whole lot. Well, it just so happened that a new ministry had started up in the community and partnered with the church and told the church that they were connecting to try and help the church serve the people in the community that were at high risk of falling apart, of just different issues, whether it's food, education, medical situations. And so this is one of the women's families. This woman's family is one of them that the church indicated needed some help. So the church is on the front lines, serving the poor, the disenfranchised, the hopeless, and the broken community of Linda Vista, Guatemala. And through people in the body of Christ like yourselves and many other people here in the United States, through the ministry, God was able to provide an education for her 3 kids, to put food on their table, to provide leaders in the church to mentor her through the Celebrate Recovery program, which helped her with a lot of her spiritual and emotional healing that she needed through all this trauma she's been through. Not only did she grow in her relationship with Christ, but also grew as a leader and became a leader in the church itself. And she even was able to start going back to school to catch up on all the education she missed as a child. She fell in love with a Christian man at the church who asked her to marry him and has since considered these children her own. Eventually, this ministry was able to also help her get her identity restored so that the children are now legally hers, and she could actually apply for residency and a work visa so she can get a job that supports her family and allows them to thrive instead of just survive. Now, she's always had a heart and a passion for serving other people. And so, after this ministry had gotten her to a place of where she was through the church, she started asking, well, how can I help? How can I return the favor? How can I serve? How can I help you guys? And so they began paying her to cook for teams, to maintain their ministry center, and God eventually led them to invite her to come on as a volunteer to help them serve the families directly that they were serving in the community. Since then, they have brought her on full-time as an employee to minister to the families of the ministry. Next slide, please. Now, for those of you that have been connected to the ministry at all, that we've been doing in the past 10 years, this woman is Olga. You might have heard her mentioned. She is now our family representative in Guatemala for the ministry. The ministry I was talking about was what was formerly known as a Serving at-Risk Families Ministry in Guatemala that we started 10 years ago. And the church that I mentioned is City of Refuge Church that we've been connected with since 2013. One of the most crucial ways that God has used Olga is through her suffering. Because she can relate to other families in the community far better than we ever can. She is positioned perfectly to relate and minister to them in such a deeply impactful way because of the hardships that she has endured. Because regardless of how we try to understand the culture, the language, to empathize with the plight of the people in the community, somewhere in the back of their minds, whether they realize it or not, there's always going to be this, yeah, but you could leave this place if you really wanted to. But they can't. Olga can't. But as Olga's favorite verse always says, next slide please, we can do all things through Christ Jesus, who gives us strength. And her life testifies to the goodness of God. And that although that we are abandoned, neglected, abused, and mistreated, God still loves us. He still cares. And He uses people like you and me to meet them where they are and show them how much He loves us. So we believe that God is calling all of us to join forces with Olga, with Christian, who's our administrator down there, City of Refuge Church, and others in Guatemala around the world to reach the desperately downtrodden. Those that are there on our team are so good at connecting, loving, and serving the people in Guatemala, we know that that's exactly where God wants them to be. And as hard as it was for us to accept, we know that God has called us back here to the United States to be able to tell their stories, to connect the overabundance of resources here in the United States with the frontline workers there. To state it plainly, they need God's help through all of us. You see, churches in Guatemala, they really don't have the money to donate to ministries. They barely have enough money to keep their own lights on, let alone serve people in the community. Companies and other organizations, they are not accustomed to supporting foundations that they haven't founded on their own. And the community itself is so poor that all they can give to help is maybe a portion of the food that they have for that day. But here in the United States, we live in so much abundance that we throw away and waste more than most Guatemalans will get in their lifetime. Don't you think it's time that we act as good stewards of God's resources, just as the original ecclesia did in Acts 2:44-45? We should ensure that our brothers and sisters ministering to the poor have what they need to continue sharing God's love and mercy. Now, I've never stood up in front of a congregation before this and just asked directly for sponsorships. But I wouldn't be doing that today if I didn't believe that it was worth asking. Mainly, I'm asking you to pray for God to show you how He has purposed you to unite to serve Guatemala, alongside our brothers and sisters who are carrying out the Great Commission on a daily basis on the front lines. We have a responsibility, brothers and sisters, not to send money to help feed people, not to help them through school or give them medicine and medical care, but to show them that God sees them, that He loves them, and He has a plan to give them a sustainable lifestyle. This way they won't have to wonder where their next meal is going to come from, or risk everything that they have to try and immigrate to the United States or even another country just to earn a couple extra dollars so that their family can eat or have a roof over their heads. Our ministry model helps them learn that they are precious in God's eyes and that He has a bigger purpose for their lives that they can actually experience on this side of heaven. Death shouldn't be their best hope, because we know that life with Jesus here on earth is. Like Brandon. When we were working on getting him, next slide, sorry. When we were working on getting him in a better school, he had just graduated 3rd grade in public school. He didn't even know how to write his own name. Or Harrison. Now he was doing his best to next slide, please. He was doing his best to support his mom with work, but he couldn't afford to put food on the table and finish his final year of high school. And Diana. Diana's a single mom who loves to cook, and we were able to put through culinary school, and then has since been able to put her other 2 sons so they could graduate high school as well. One of them as a culinary student. Now, some folks hear all this and they wonder, well, what can I do to help? Well, I'm glad you asked. Currently, the ministry in Guatemala is underfunded by $2,000 per month. Thankfully, we've reached out to some local businesses and they agreed to donate towards helping fill that gap while we apply for grants and we try and get other sponsorships. But that can only go so far. For $100 a month, you can contribute to a year's worth of one family member's well-being. That includes education, nutritional support, any medical care that might come up, and especially spiritual guidance. Now, we understand that not everybody has that to allot in their budget. I get it. For $50 a month, this will help with 1 month's tuition for a child. And about $25 a month sponsorship helps with nutritional supplements for a family that just can't seem to be able to make enough on a monthly basis to feed themselves appropriately. Now, all of this goes towards meeting a family's immediate needs to break the cycle of poverty in their lives and help them out of situations like Olga's was and into the promise of a life worth living. We have a website where you can learn about different families that we serve. It's guat.u2s.org. As you guys leave, we have cards out back there for you guys to look that up and just learn the families, learn their stories, get to know them, and pray over them. So I really always like the opportunity to, I know that like in a presentation, you can't answer everybody's questions. There might be something hanging in the back of your mind. So I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have about the ministry, the families we serve, how do we do it, more about Olga if you want to know more. That was a very brief version of her 20-year story, 20-plus year story. Anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am. How many families we serve? Currently we serve 12 families in the area. Yes. the way the ministry is designed is we don't just like blanket just send stuff out. Is that we come alongside families individually that we have evaluated as they would be a good candidate to receive what we can help them with, and we actually, like I said before, walk in that journey. So we're alongside of them. We visit them on a regular basis. We minister to them. We visit them in their homes. That's one of the unique things about our ministry is that we focus on, you're at this certain place right now, so we're not just going to give you a couple handouts so you can survive this month and walk away, but we're actually going to build that relationship with you and help you to build your relationship with Christ along the way.
Do you do anything to help with skills as far as them being productive in their community and teaching them financing and teaching them how to do a job, that they can then be on their own? Do you do anything like that in the community?
Yes. Thankfully, over the past probably about 5 years, we've seen the local municipalities have actually designed and put together classes for life skills like that. Some of them are like trade crafts, like sewing or carpentry work. I'm trying to think of different things. Nursing classes, all sorts of stuff like that. So folks who they'll have to read and write in order to take the classes, but they're offered practically free. Sometimes they'll say like, "Oh, we have to pay for your own materials," which will help them with that. So a lot of times, if somebody has an interest in something like that and they don't have a regular job, we'll encourage them to do that. Other times, part of what Olga does when she ministers to them is helping them with that. They're like, "Oh, well, I just can't seem to have enough money." I'm like, "Well, what are you spending it on? Let's sit down and talk about what's a budget. What's a budget, right?" Like, okay, well, let's get a pen and paper and we'll show you what that looks like. The other thing too that we have seen a lot is part of the cycle is when you come from a broken home, that's the only standard you have of knowing of how to raise children. And so Olga has done a lot because she has learned a lot herself of how to care for children, how to raise them, in the ways of the Lord, as we like to say, and give them basic skills of that, or interacting with their neighbors, like, "Oh, my neighbor keeps doing this or keeps doing that. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, I go to the courthouse, they won't do anything." I'm like, "Well, this is how Jesus told us to interact with other people." So all sorts of different life skills that.
Yes, that answers your question.
Mm-hmm.
Sir, can you explain to the people in here? I know this question. I know the answer already. But the unemployment rate, political system, how the churches function in down there in Guatemala, because I know there's a lot of different things that go on that you have to navigate through in order to get yourself into the community like that. Like the cost of different things that are actually produced in Guatemala compared to the stuff that's actually shipped in from outside of Guatemala.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of the first thing that you asked, because that was like a 6-point question. No, it's good though. Thanks for asking. Unemployment, yes. So the unemployment rate in Guatemala is more than 50%. So more than 50% of the people are unemployed. And that is because there's just not enough work or money to pay for work. And so a lot of the way people just survive, if they can't get one of those few jobs that are there, is they'll sell stuff out of their house, like fruits and vegetables. We have one mom who she'll buy stuff in bulk at the market, take them home, and then sell them locally to her community. Now what she makes off of that is maybe 50 cents a day, depending on how much she sells. But it's at least something, right? As far as the church environment, churches are very competitive, unfortunately, in Guatemala. And there have been many efforts that City Refuge Church, specifically that I know of, has tried to do, is just try to network churches together. But we have seen a lot of stumbling blocks in that, churches will recognize each other and they'll be friendly with each other because that's what we're supposed to do. But when you say, "Hey, like, let's get together and let's have some kind of, joint educational thing that we do, or training leaders or some kind of conference or something like that," you won't get any participation. And it's extremely hard. And so because of that, the religious side of things, when you're talking to people about God and stuff like that, it's really hard. Like, "Well, what church do you come from?" Like, "Well, I don't come from any church." That actually opens up doors because we're not affiliated with a specific church or denomination. It seems kind of weird to some people, but like, oh, are you guys Baptists? Are you guys this? Are you guys Catholic? Like, no, we're just believers in Jesus Christ. As far as the politics are concerned, this might not be a surprise, but politicians are corrupt in Guatemala, right? But even more so. I believe the last 2 or 3 presidents have actually been arrested and are currently in jail for corruption, finding out how they've been skimming off the top of stuff while they were in office. And that doesn't even count what they were doing before then. But it's, with, you guys might see in the news sometimes they talk about Guatemala, Central America. The U.S. sends millions or billions of dollars every year. Well, that never gets to the people. And that's why there's no social structure, and it can't be funded, because by the time it gets down to that level, there's just a couple dollars left, right? And so it goes nowhere. And so, unfortunately, that's the reason why there's such a need for this kind of work in Guatemala, because the corruption is so rampant that the money coming through the government doesn't really get to where it needs to go. Or something else you asked, I can't think of. Oh, yeah. So, one of the great things about living in Guatemala is that you get fresh, whole food that's really cheap, because they grow it there. Guatemala is the land of perpetual spring. That's actually what Guatemala means. But then there's a lot of other stuff that has to be imported because it's not created there, like gas, for instance. They were one of the first countries that when we started having our gas issues and we're like, oh, it's getting real, $4, it's about $6 a gallon now. And public transport is the main way of transport, because not everybody owns a car. Electronics and all that stuff, and that's part of where that corruption comes in, because electronics that are imported, there's like a 25% tax on them, so they're really expensive, and those taxes go to the government that the officials actually take. So that is that cycle, and so it's like, well, I can't trust anybody that's supposed to be helping me. A lot of what we fight against is the impoverished, or the poverty mindset, or the poverty spirit, because poverty doesn't exist because we don't have things. Poverty exists because there's a system somewhere that has failed us. And unfortunately, here in the United States, we're very privileged because there might be 1 or 2 systems that fail us, but there's other systems in place that kind of make up that gap, or we can do it on our own. But in Guatemala, when the church fails you, and the government fails you, and your family fails you, and your community fails you, what's left? Nothing. So what am I going to do? And that's exactly what happened in Olga's story. Her family failed her, her friend failed her, her new family failed her, the government failed her, and so there was nowhere to turn. And that's why people in Guatemala actually have so much more faith than we do, because they don't have any other option but to trust in God. Now, how does that flesh itself out on a daily basis? That's what our ministry tries to do, and help them see what that means. Because thanks to the Spanish conquistadors coming in and spreading Catholicism, and then after that, the Presbyterians coming in and bringing in evangelism. That's the sect, or the branch of Christianity that it is known as. The people in Guatemala are very over-churched. I have been teaching at night on a Celebrate Recovery ministry, and some drunk guy who can't even stand up gets up and repeats a Bible verse to me better than I can read it off the paper in front of me. I'm like, wow. And I'm like, that's awesome that you know it. How are you applying it to your life? Nobody knew what I was talking about. And so we try to come alongside people and be like, yes, you know what the Bible says. Yes, you know what the church tells you. But how do we walk this out on a daily basis and actually be a disciple and follower of Christ? And so being able to come in and help people and minister to them in these physical needs that they have, we're able to show them. First, they start asking questions like, well, how can you be so happy? When Olga tells her story, they're like, why are you so full of joy and happiness and hope? She's like, well, let me tell you about Jesus. And let me tell you what he's done in my life. And that's how we're able to change lives. And then those families, just like Olga's, because Olga's was a family we used to serve, becomes a pillar of Christ and God's kingdom in their own community. We serve about 12 families. And, but people are constantly stopping by Olga's house and asking her for help in one way or another because that's who she is. They know that when they go there, they're going to be prayed for. They'll probably get some food. They'll get some kind of medical help. She has some first aid training, and she wants to continue that so that she can help people even more in the community. But they just stop by her house. Like when we have meetings, when we have virtual meetings, she actually has to go to the ministry center because she knows that at least 3 people are going to knock on her door just in the hour that we're meeting. And that's not because she's giving handouts, that's because she's providing hope and faith to people and love. Can I answer all your questions? The safety? Oh, yeah. So, we have things like, welfare and food banks and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't exist at all. There have been efforts to try and make that exist, but it's only short-lived. Because as Americans, we have been like, well, let's just dump money on the problem and that'll fix it all, right? So we do that, and then there's a food bank in Guatemala who has food to hand out to the community maybe for 3 months. And then what? Then the people are hungry again. Yeah, they were fed for 3 months, and that's great. But working on that, how do you teach somebody to fish instead of just giving them a fish, right? And so in this ministry, we'll give them a fish while they're teaching them to fish, so they're not hungry while they're fishing. But then over time, we'll give them less and less fish and encourage them to get the fish themselves because now they know how to do it.
So we talked, you shared with us a lot about the corruption, the poverty, the home, the community, the churches. How does natural disasters in the area play a part into the brokenness of things?
Yeah. So, we just had some. That's what was making me think of it. With the tropical depressions that have been holding over Guatemala, there's actually been a lot of landslides. There's been sinkholes. The main highway that goes from Guatemala City to Villanueva actually just kind of like washed away a couple weeks ago. And so that affects people. Not only does it like wipe out entire towns because there's not as much land in Guatemala to hold as many people as there are. So to put it in perspective, Guatemala land size is about the size of Pennsylvania, but has 4 times as many people. Not to mention a lot of Guatemala is covered in volcanoes and mountains. So it's not like it's all just flat land for everybody to spread out on. And that's why we have, will look like what we call squatter villages, which a squatter village is somewhere to go temporarily until you can find a new home. But there is nowhere else to go. So when there's a landslide that takes out the whole town, whether you survive it or not, then where are you going to go? Because there's nowhere else to go other than move in with somebody else. And so earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, right now they're in rainy season, and so there's a lot of flooding. And there's only so far that all that stuff can go, and it just takes it out and devastates it. And because that strong infrastructure isn't there, it's not like they can just, all of a sudden just move in and fix stuff like we would see here. They have to find ways around it, like I was saying, the highway. They actually brought in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to try and figure out how to reconstruct the road so that the main thoroughfare for travelers can actually use it. I don't know if there's anything else that you know. Oh, yeah. Fresh water. So, well, the water's not clean. So one of the first things that we did is that we helped families to get, everyone's got a filter in their home so that they can filter the water, all the bacteria and all that kind of stuff. And even then, it's still there. As some of you guys who know my wife has been sick since 2018 because of all the bacteria and stuff that's there. As careful as we are, we'd still get sick as well. And, indoor plumbing, you might get like one pipe that comes into your land that you have a hose attached to, and, that's the best you got. And during the dry season, when there's no water, there's no water. Like, you can go to the store and buy some maybe, but If you only got $5, do you buy beans? Do you buy water? Do you send your kid to school? Do you fix your roof? Do you get some clothes? Do you buy a bed because you don't really have one? So there's no infrastructure there to actually help. Whereas here we have a lot of things that we can reach out to that, receive donations and have ways of helping, or somewhere to stay while your house is being rebuilt or whatever. That just doesn't exist there. And there's all things that, until you actually go there and live there like my wife and I have, you don't realize all that we have here in that system and that infrastructure that actually supports, people here that are homeless actually have more than people who have their own homes in Guatemala. Just to put that in perspective. Answer your question. Anybody else? Oh, we got two.
Do you ever team up with other ministries from surrounding countries like Belize or Honduras, the ones that are directly El Salvador? I don't know about their ministries, but do you ever team up with ministries or connect with pastors from different, different countries within Central America?
We have not yet. So that's one of the things that we're really looking forward to as we've launched out from Servants and have started our own nonprofit, is to be able to do exactly that. The whole time that we have been in Guatemala, we've been asked about launching ministry in different areas of Guatemala, as well as going to countries like El Salvador. The founding pastor of the City of Refuge Church is originally from El Salvador, and he moved back there, and his son took over the church. And as soon as they got there, about 6 months into it, they're like, "When are you guys coming to El Salvador?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm still trying to get my feet in here in Guatemala." So we do very much look forward to being able to do that, because that's part of, helping people connect with. I mean, there are some services, as I mentioned, about like some of the schooling and stuff, provided by the local governments. So in doing that, we can also link up with other ministries to be able to connect them to stuff like that they might provide. But also to take the same ministry model and help others in other countries as well, and to replicate it, because sometimes people ask, is there anybody else doing this stuff? Like doing ministry the way you guys do? And we're like, not that I know of. I'm not going to say no, but we haven't. There are some ministries that are similar to empowering the people to serve their own communities instead of us just trying to move in and save the day. So does that answer your question? Yeah, okay.
What is the success rate of the program?
Oh, I haven't figured out that metric yet, but good question. Let me think. So we have served probably in total about 20 families. And when I say served, some of them have graduated our program or have moved out of the area that we're able to serve them from, because we like to stay close and connected. We're not going to, send food to a place that's 3 hours away where we can't visit them and make sure that it's actually going towards feeding them. So with the amount that have left the program and continue to be successful, I would say probably about 75% are doing well that we know of. There's some that we've completely lost contact with. There's some that when they left, we knew that they were doing good, but then we haven't heard from them. So we don't know if they're still doing well or not. But yeah, I'd say about 75%.
So local churches in that area, you are in contact with leadership or pastors there, and because people down in that area talk and observe, like, is there an interest, or, just right there without going to other countries?
Yeah. Well, and that's part of the struggle of, for us to come in and try and connect with another church is extremely difficult, because the first thing they're going to say is, well, what do you want to do? Or you're trying to take over a church? You're trying to tell us what to do? It's like, no, we're just a ministry trying to help. Like right here, I can come to you guys. I mean, a lot of you guys know me because I've been involved with this church for a while, but I could come in and be like, hey, we're doing this, and you guys are like, wow, that sounds really good. Like, I want to be a part of that. How can I connect? If I do that at a church in Guatemala, they're going to be like, what do you want from us? And we don't have it. We're already doing this, or we have our own way of doing it. And so that's why it's so hard to do that. And so our connection with City of Refuge Church was unfortunately an anomaly in that, like, we're like, hey, we want to be here to help you, to empower you, the church, to serve your own people. And they're like, thanks, we need that help. Here's a list, right? So as we developed this, Missy and I were actually going down on Tuesday to Guatemala for a month. And part of what we're doing, we've actually restructured the entire governing board of the ministry there to be all local ministers. And so there's 2 pastors on the board. There is also a deacon from another church, and then also a gentleman who's a nurse in a local medical clinic. And so through them, we're going to be able to reach other churches and partner with them so they can share that vision and that model and be like, look, this ministry exists to provide resources so you can do what God's called you to do. And they're able to do it in their language, in their culture, know how to approach, know how to breach the subject. So then from there, then we can spread out that way. Because, it is so hard. There's a lot of religious churches, yes. And there's we come from, let's just say, we come from the Baptist background, so if you're not a Baptist church, we don't want to have any part to do with you, right? Or we're a Pentecostal church, or we're Assemblies of God, and if you're not associated, if we don't get approval from up on high, which is some organization here in the U.S. actually, if they don't approve a ministry in Guatemala partnering with them, then they'll be like, thanks, but no thanks. And you're like, but we're here trying to help you serve the people. And they're like, well, we can't do it because of doctrinal whatever. And I'm like, how about Jesus? How's that for doctrine, right? So that's the uphill battle. But it is what it is.
Do the children that you serve attend public school or?
Yes, great question. Majority of them don't. It's like flipping through the Rolodex in my head, like who all? The majority of them don't. So one big difference, the way Guatemala, especially in schools, work in Guatemala versus here, is that there is a public school. There's a public school paid for by the government. Teachers are underpaid. Classrooms are overrun. Families could pay maybe like $5 or $10 for the year to enroll their kids in the school. Maybe have to buy some school supplies, and that's it. That is usually the option that most families are able to take. Unfortunately, because the teachers are underpaid, they're always going on strike, and then the kids just get a diploma anyway because it's not their fault that they miss school. They don't learn anything, like I said about Brandon. Graduated 3rd grade, he was so proud, couldn't write his own name. When we put him in what they call a private school, where you actually have to pay tuition, but that goes towards higher qualified teachers, smaller classrooms, and actual good course curriculums that we vet before we put a kid in school to make sure that they're actually learning to advance. He actually had to start over in grade 1 because he didn't know how to read or write. And so that's one of the things that we try to do is that when we start to help a family, the first thing we look at is the kid's education. Because a lot of times, either the kids aren't interested, the parents don't know how to force their kids to go to school or to do their homework or anything like that because the parents themselves are uneducated. And so they're like, well, we need to put food on the table, so come to work with me and let's go into the coffee fields or cornfields or whatever and harvest, because if there's 2 people working, then we can earn more money so we can actually eat tonight. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll look at the kids' education situation and see if we can place them in a school, usually like the following year, because you can't just drop them in the middle of the year. And that transition from public school to a private school is hard as it is for them. There's a lot more discipline. There's a lot more, requirements for learning. Nowadays, there's a lot more. You have to have a computer and you have to have internet in your house. And, if your house only has one light bulb and no refrigerator, how are you going to have a laptop and internet at the same time, right? So those are all things that we put into that we try to help them to do so that they can be on pace with that. Now, the good thing is they actually just went back to in-person classes for the first time in like 2 years because of But yeah, so we place them in schools where we know that they will get a good education that's actually going to make them competitive in the job market as they grow. And yeah, does that answer your question? Yes, sir.
Sorry. The exchange rate and how it affects the goods and services down there. Like something costs $20 here, that $20 goes a lot further down there because of the exchange rate and size.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the exchange rate's about. We'll get into some numbers here. 7.5 about. But it's usually not a one-for-one exchange, like Eric was saying. There are some things that are a lot cheaper, and the dollar will go a long way. Just to give you a for instance, the house that we rent down there, which is kind of expensive for Guatemalan standards, costs us about $325 a month. So it's actually pretty good for a plot of land, about half an acre, and a house. It's an old house, but it's a house. And but like I said, gasoline, when you look at the exchange, that winds up being about right now about $6, $6.50. So that's a lot higher. What else? Electricity costs about 3 times as much as it does here. And so Guatemalans are extremely good at conserving electricity. It amazes us how little people pay on their electrical bills, because they've had to learn, they've had to adapt. They unplug all their devices, they make sure the lights are always turned off, like all that kind of stuff. It's pretty amazing to see how their environment and their situation is different, and because money is scarce, then they find different ways to make things work, make things last. As I said, we throw away so much stuff that they would make last. There's things that we throw in the trash that we're like, there's no way anybody's going to want to take this and use it for something, and it's gone within an hour when we put it out because somebody took it and they're like, they got a use for it. And we're like, so resourceful, but you have to be. So does that answer your question? Anything else? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for being able to share. As I said, that there are cards when you leave. So it's got our website on there for the Guatemala Ministries. You can go on there, learn about the families. You can sign up for any trips that are coming up. We don't have any planned right now, but we can put you on the list. And just thank you guys so much.